Welcome to the Theotherapist Podcast, where theologically trained licensed therapists share health and healing conversations. Join our host, Dr. Trice for conversations about real-life issues from both theological and therapeutic perspectives.
Hello and welcome to Season 3 of the Theotherapist Podcast. This is Episode 3, and we are so glad that you are joining us today. I have an awesome guest today, and I can't wait to introduce her to you. But first, a bit of housekeeping. I want to make sure that if you're not following us and subscribing, that you do so now. Go ahead and give us a follow, a subscribe, and a share if you can. Know that we're on all podcast platforms as well as YouTube. Occasionally, we'll even do a YouTube live, so make sure that you're joining us for any of the episodes that we have upcoming. Visit us at our website at thetherapistpodcast.com or visit us at seeksolacenow.com. Also, just so you know that the episodes that we have usually feature licensed therapists, just as myself, but our episodes are not intended to be a substitute for professional counseling. We strongly encourage you to find a therapist of your own so that you can work through whatever your personal and unique needs are. Once again, glad that you're here. Let's buckle up. Let me introduce you to the awesome guest that we have today. Today we have Sabrina Gilchrist with us, and when I start reading to you all these accolades and all these letters behind her name, she's got even more than me. So I'm going to acknowledge that and give credit where credit is due for all the hard work that she has done to get to where she is and to give back to others and to pour back into others. So Sabrina Gilchrist is a MDiv, MA, licensed clinical mental health counselor and a nationally certified counselor. She is a spiritual coach, an author, a consultant. She's formerly been a nonprofit executive, and she's a highly sought after speaker, teacher, and mentor. She's someone who inspires others to navigate the challenges that they're facing so that they can foster growth. In addition to her clinical work and her leadership, Sabrina offers spiritually integrated coaching, consultation, and suicide prevention training through her entrepreneurial ventures. And she has her own LLC, Sabrina Nichole LLC. So I want to introduce you and invite her to say hello. How you doing? Hello, Sabrina. How's it going?
Going well. It's going well. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for that lovely introduction. It's hard to believe that's me, but thank you.
You know, with so much, it sounds like that you've been doing, to kind of build a space where you are looking at everything from suicidality to consulting to spiritual integration. I'm curious, how do you see the integration of theology and therapy? Like, how do they connect for you?
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about that, and what I'll say is I believe theology and therapy intersect beautifully, even when it's not overt. When I think about theology, I say, thus saith Sabrina, which is my phrase that I use sometimes, that theology is really about exploring how the thread of divinity and the thread of humanity are woven together in this tapestry that we call God's excellent plan. So really, we're looking at how the divine and creation interact. What's the relationship? And what do we believe? Why do we believe it? And how do we believe it? And really what it boils down to is, at least from my faith perspective, that God's plan for us is excellent. God's plan for us is good. God's plan for us is wonderful. And we are meant to live well. And to me, that's where therapy or counseling, I may use them interchangeably, that's where that comes in, because the whole goal and purpose of counseling and therapy is to help people grab a hold of wellness, to rediscover hope, and then manifest that hope in their lives so that they can truly live well within themselves and to be well with others.
I think that whole wellness mindset is what undergirds kind of the bridge to me between theology and therapy, because it is, to be well with our soul, right? And to be well with our mind and our body and our spirit is kind of the goal that we see connecting all these pieces together. Today's topic and the title that we kind of bridged as a talking point for today is Hold On, Black mental health in trying times, right? I know you're aware, I am aware, there's so much happening right now. And in my client base, I have a large number of African Americans. I imagine you might as well. And so what emerged kind of in our discussion before this session today was what's happening with Black mental health and what are some things we can bring to the surface and lift up at this intersection point of theology and therapy, because these times are trying. There are so many uncertainties. There's so much political unrest. There is, there are people dealing with life transitions. There's just a lot of trying situations and times. And so I'm curious for you, when we start thinking about kind of either this topic of Black mental health or one of your passion areas, like how do you see that fitting into kind of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I love that question. So, the reality is, and let me put some guardrails on what I'm saying and what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk from the perspective of yes, sort of this culmination of what I'm seeing with my clients in therapy, but also kind of the lived experiences happening across the United States with all of the changes that we have going on. So I'm limiting that view to just US, and then also my particular interest right now is around the mental health of Black males, Black men and Black boys in the US. So that has opened up the door for me to do a lot of digging into what is happening. What are the statistics? What's the data? And then also historically, we know there's a lot that is factoring into how we are navigating life in the U.S. One of my areas of interest, along with suicide prevention, is trauma recovery. And so we know that trauma really is, in Sabrina Ease, I tell people trauma is any energy, feeling, experience that's stuck in our bodies.
Oh, yes.
It's just stuck. These things that we have experienced that have caused disruption, that have caused us to be off balance, it gets stuck in our bodies and it creates trauma responses. And we know that, within the Black communities, and I'm intentional about putting that in the plural, because there are lots of different, there are a lot of different experiences in here. So in Black communities, we're facing a lot of trauma, dealing with a lot of trauma that is both historical and generational. We know we've got racial trauma happening, vicarious trauma. An example of that, I tell people, when we think about the George Floyd and others who have been murdered in this country and through these really horrible means, the more we're seeing it and hearing it, we begin to have vicarious trauma. These things are impacting our mental health as a people. And so, and then my own lived experience with my faith, with having mental illness diagnoses, having been hospitalized once before, living with suicide risk, and then reconciling that with my faith, because I am a woman of faith. All of those things have impacted my journey in terms of how I want to contribute to the mental health in our communities. And then the other thing is this, I'm going to quote sort of Mabiti's words in his book, African Religions and Philosophies. And basically what he said is, African people are spiritual people. We are religious people. You cannot separate the African from his or her or their spirituality. And so our interventions and the way that we take care of ourselves must incorporate that multicultural aspect of us. We are spiritual people. Notice I'm not necessarily leaning into the religious part.
We are spiritual because at our root,
we are spiritual. At our root, we are spiritual, and that manifests across many different types of religions, or no religion at all, but just simply being spiritual. So we've got to factor that into how does the soul and the spirit interact with our mental health, our physical health, all the healths that are folded into a sense of wellness.
I think that affects, kind of how we shape the guiding question for each podcast episode. We have somewhat of a guiding question, something that we want to speak to kind of to direct the work that we're doing in this space. The question for this particular podcast is how do we make it through these times, right? So how do we draw on that kind of spiritual rootedness within our communities? How do we pull on recognizing that there are perhaps some traumas, vicarious or direct, that we need to navigate through? And how do we find a way through this? What's our way forward? I think as a guiding question that just kind of sets the tone for us to look like where do we go from here? Not to escape the fact of everything that fed into us getting to here, but to also look ahead to see what are some other things that we can do that can help us move forward. Do you have any thoughts on that guiding question before we kind of hit some topics?
I do. I have quite a few thoughts, quite a few thoughts and quite a few things that I've been playing with and thinking about, even as I have tried or have been, like everyone else, trying to navigate the current landscape and what's happening. There are some things that we need to do. One is certainly need to acknowledge and name the pain, not so that we get stuck in it, not so that we stay there, but we can't deal with or navigate or process things if we ignore that they exist. And so I think in the Black community or communities, that stigma is still there. It's lessened in the last few years, but it's still there. And so we have to continue to do work to tear down the stigma around mental health and getting support. And as we do that, we've got to be brave enough to name the challenges and the struggles that we've had. And then in the naming, hopefully finding solidarity with one another so that we together can envision the way forward.
One of the things I tell my clients,
scriptures.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things I tell my clients often is you can't heal from anything you can't name, right? If you are not able to face it enough to acknowledge it and name it, how can you heal from it? You've got to find a way to have the courage to at least name what ails us. Go ahead. Yes.
And in so doing, and I love that, and in so doing, I believe those of us who are in a position to hear someone else name their experience and their struggle, we have to do the work to honor their story. That's the other piece to it. It's not enough to just hear it and then try to offer, solutions and try to fix it. But sometimes what we really need is to just be heard and for people to honor and affirm, that's my experience. This is my truth. This is my narrative. This is my story and my journey. And in doing that, we begin to create what Soul Shop would call soul safe community. So we begin to create and curate these safe spaces where people can continue to be brave, continue to name and acknowledge what they've been going through and where they are right now, and then support one another. And that's where the solidarity comes in. Not that we're trying to out suffer each other, right? So I try to tell people as best you can, hold back from saying, girl, I know what you mean, because, and then you're offering your, sometimes everybody needs their space. Everybody needs their window of acknowledgement and honor in the healing process. Then standing in solidarity with one another. And then this new layer that I really have started leaning into around hope, which is coming together to envision together what the way forward is, where we're going. What would happen if we collectively develop the vision for our promised land? And this is why I love write the vision, make it plain. I'm really leaning into, we've got to write the vision, but we've got to write it collectively. There's got to be a collective vision, a collective way forward for us to really grab a hold to the hope for our communities, not just our individual lives, but our communities.
And I think it's the doing things in isolation that I think just amplifies the fear and anxiety. Feeling like I'm the only one going through this. I'm the only one experiencing this the way that I'm experiencing it. But I think when we are intentional to kind of come together and bear one another, draw witness to one another's experience, that way we collectively can kind of fight this and develop strategies that will help us navigate through what it is that we're dealing with. And so I think it's really
Absolutely.
helpful for us to, just remember that we are not fighting this journey alone, right? There is
That's
community.
right.
We can create community where we don't see it, and we can find it where it
That's
already
right.
exists.
That's right. That's right. I think another layer to this that I will add is we've got to be realistic as well.
Mm-hmm. We do.
There is we got to be realistic, right? I was recently on a panel and I kind of referenced being a part of the microwave generation, being in a point in our history where answers are at our fingertips, quite literally. Um, Everything moves so quickly that I think it has obscured the reality that some things like change truly
Mm-hmm.
takes time. And actually, I'm going to amend that and I'm going to say transformation takes time. Change can
It
happen
does.
quickly, but when it happens quickly, you run the risk of it not being sustained.
Mm.
But
Or
transformation, on
fully
the other
formed.
hand, is
Mm-hmm.
yes, yes. And so we've got to be realistic about this. I understand people don't want to feel pain. We don't like to suffer. It's not in we don't like that. But the reality is healing sometimes hurts worse than the initial injury
Mm-hmm.
or the initial wounding. And we
Oh, it
have to be
does.
willing to let it take its time to heal and run its course. And so as we are working together and healing together, we also have to extend some grace and some
Mm-hmm.
patience in the process. So I think that is incredibly important as well to lay that out there. And it's why, when I go over professional disclosure with my clients, I tell them, listen, when in therapy, there will be times where it's going to hurt.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to hurt. And you may question, why am I doing this? Or
Right.
how long do I have to hurt? I mean, certainly I can identify with that sentiment,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a part of the process and it is truly healing.
And it's recognizing as well that it may hurt until it feels sustainably better, right? Sometimes that
Yes,
healing process is not quick, it's not immediate, but it's purposeful. It's
correct.
moving in a direction.
Yes,
One of the things we talked
absolutely.
about, we've already kind of, alluded to it, but, how do you see the spirit influence in our mental health? I mean, we've talked about it. We've talked about the bridge. We've talked about the collectivity and a couple of other things, but I'm curious, when you think mental health and you think wellness and you think spirit, how's it influence?
Yeah. So I am what I call a frou-frou hippie born in the wrong decade. I believe that spirit is a part of everything, that it is inseparable, that it is infused in everything we do and all all we are. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I tend to lean towards orientations that theoretical orientations in counseling that are much more spiritual overtly than some of the
Right.
more covert theories that we deal with in counseling. And I am a huge fan of Viktor Frankl and
Mm-hmm.
logotherapy, which is really focused on helping people find, create meaning in their lives, and
Yes.
particularly creating meaning out of suffering.
Right.
So huge proponent of Viktor Frankl and logotherapy, also a huge proponent of transpersonal
Mm-hmm.
therapy approaches where there's an intentional integration of people's spiritual practices, if they want it, to help them achieve wellness. And
Mm-hmm.
we know from the wellness wheel that spirituality is a part of that. It's one of the 8 dimensions or domains of wellness. So
Right.
I think in order to help people be well and live well, we can't ignore the spiritual aspect of us.
Mm-hmm.
Our spirituality is where we make our meaning, where we align with our values and connect to something greater than ourselves. And so I believe that is a crucial part of our well being as people.
And I think it is that same meaning making that helps us in stressful times, right? It is all in how
Absolutely.
you understand and perceive what's happening in this season that helps you navigate it better, right? If whether
Absolutely.
it's the church phrase, and we wrestle not with flesh and blood, right? Whatever it is that,
Yep.
that helps you understand and frame meaning to what's happening, that helps you to navigate, I think, and find a healthier way of being, because it has
Yes.
some way of stabilizing and framing the experience for you.
Absolutely. It reminds me of Nietzsche, who Viktor Frankl borrowed from,
Mm-hmm.
but Nietzsche saying, he who finds a why uh, can bear almost anyhow.
Yeah.
He who finds a why to life can bear almost anyhow. And so if we can tap into the meaning and tap into our personal why, why do we need to or want to survive these times? Why? What is the why? And for me, the why part of it is to help people, right? I want to help people be okay. I can't do that if I'm not here, right? I can't help people if I'm broken down myself somewhere in a corner, right? And so
Right.
that is my why, to take care of myself, to pursue and to um, cultivate my mental health and well-being so that I can help others reach that state as well. So that is a why, and that's definitely something we've got to do. We've got to tap back into our whys to keep on surviving and keep on pushing and navigating the challenges and the pain that's before us now.
And then that kind of speaks to the second topic we want to talk about today, which is protecting our mental health, particularly when things feel dark, when we do feel like this is suffering. And unfortunately, there may be times to come that feel even more like suffering for what our
Yes.
experience is. And so when we think about
Yeah.
protecting our mental health, it is one, to have some sense of meaning and some sense of purpose to kind of what might be happening in life. But then if we get to a place of peace or contentment or wellness, how do we hold on? Like, what do we need to do to kind of
Yeah.
keep that space?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Um, got a few thoughts about that as well. One of them is we've got to do, we've got to do a better job with our boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it is easy to either um, be too open to all of the stimuli, all the information, all of the this, that, and the other that can bombard us. Or we
Yes.
can be way too closed off, which is, create some isolation for us, right? So I've been doing a lot of work with people around having healthier boundaries, learning how to say no, practicing saying no, even when it's uncomfortable, because no is a complete sentence, right? And the truth is, we are not infinite sources. I tell people all the time, I only know one person who was infinite and who is infinite, and it's not me.
Exactly.
And so right. And so I've got to learn how to close myself off so that I can build myself back up so that I can open myself up again, right? So there's this ebb and flow, and our boundaries are so important in that. The other thing that I believe we've got to do to protect our to protect our mental health and well-being is something that I call create our mental health first aid kit. Okay. So in the same way that we have a first aid kit for physical injuries and all of that, we need one for our mental health. So I tell people you need to have your call list, 2 to 3 people who are speed dial that you can trust, that you can
Who will
call
pick
on
up?
when you need some, yeah, who will pick up. And at least if they don't pick up, they'll call you back for real. And y'all got a signal 911, help me out, something. Um, but we all need somebody, right? And so for me, that's my therapist. I've got 2 best friends and my brother,
Mm.
and I will call them in a minute if I need, intervention, if I need
Right.
that kind of support. The other thing that I tell people, because we take this for granted, you got to have some fun. You've got
Absolutely.
to incorporate leisure in your life, and you've got to incorporate rest in your life. I have a friend, uh, Canby Swan. I don't think she would mind me naming her. Canby Swan used to say all the time, rest is an act of war. So
So,
I think in the hustle and bustle, yeah, in the hustle and bustle of life, we get moving and we get going, and we are overworked in a lot of respects and have not returned to a place of getting good rest, right? So if we're going to protect our peace, we've got to rest, we've got to have some fun. As crazy and as however you want to describe what's happening in the world today, you got to give yourself a break. I tell people, go watch you a funny movie,
Mm-hmm.
find a funny TikTok, do something, make yourself
Yeah.
laugh, give yourself a chance. Color in a coloring book, go run and do cartwheels like a kid, do something
No.
that's just play and it's just fun. Yeah.
It's so interesting. I'm starting to
That's
see,
so
even on my
important.
social media, that they're doing days here like adult recess or adult field day, to try to get us back out and reconnected to self and the joy that came with play, for us as children. And so I'm
Yes.
so encouraged by that. One of the things
Mm.
I often tell my clients, and I have a lot of people who have a lot of demanding roles or leadership roles, and I often tell them, you need a space where you don't have a role or responsibility. You need a space where you're
Yes.
not a thing to someone. You're not a mother, you're not a daughter, you're not a
Yes.
husband, you're not a wife, you're not the minister, you're not the manager. You have a space where you are just you. And you can take that and try to reconnect with self. You kind of like reclaim the
Yes.
anonymity of just being a good steward of self.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And it's so true. It's so true. And, as I think about myself, I had to come to a realization that I would go and try to find those spaces, and I would join, the clubs, the different hobbies and things like that. But then I would just start trying to take on leadership in that group, or whatever the case may be. And I said, Sabrina, that's not what this is. You're supposed to be just having fun, not
Mm-hmm.
not trying to make sure everything runs smoothly and all this. So I would just say to people, especially folks who tend to be workaholics,
Mm-hmm.
or come from a family system of workaholics, it is okay to not work. It's
Right.
okay to be in a space that you enjoy just for the sake of
Mm.
enjoying it. You don't have to go and make every space better that you go into.
And
Sometimes it's
reminding
okay to
yourself
just
that
be.
rest is productive. It is serving a
Yes.
purpose. It does have meaning.
Yes.
It is doing something
Hmm.
when you're resting. You have to replenish. You have to create spaces for this body to continue to thrive and to be nourished. And if you don't, you can't create, you can't play, you get bogged down, and it's going to just further pull you into the dark space.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Um, and then the other thing, and I'll let this be kind of my last one for this question at least, is we've got to monitor what we are consuming,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, you know, we've got to be vigilant when it comes to our thoughts. We've got to be vigilant when it comes to where we are spending our time and how we are allocating our attention.
Right.
So if I am someone who all I do is sit and consume all the negativity and the negative commentary about what's happening, if that's all I'm consuming, that of course is going to impact my mental health.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying to ignore what's happening. I'm not saying that at
But
all.
limit.
But what I am saying is, especially limit it. Absolutely, monitor, limit. Make sure you're balancing it out. This is why
Mm-hmm.
I love platforms like Upworthy. Where you can turn on the news and all that and get all this negative stuff about what's the suffering in the world. But then you've got outlets like Upworthy who are intentionally elevating positive stories and letting you know it's not all bad, right? There is
Right.
still some good and there's still beauty in the world. So really making sure you're consuming that as well and not more of the other is so, so vitally important. And being intentional about surrounding yourself with some element of beauty.
Mm.
I intentionally surround myself with pictures of flowers and the ocean, and it doesn't matter if it's dark outside and raining. I've got something around me where I can look at and say, "This is so beautiful." and it reminds me that there's still beauty in the world.
That's so important and so powerful. I often tell people, usually every fall before my year starts, I go and do a 3-day silent retreat. And either I'll do it at a monastery or the mountains or someplace that's just beautiful and it's quiet. It's just me. It's just kind of reconnecting to nature because I feel like that grounds me back into who I am.
Yes.
It's no longer kind of the things I have to do and the places I have to be. It just grounds me in just who am I. And I think that grounding helps me stay, stable, so that I can navigate the things that may come. Because, the world gets pretty loud. And we have to find
Very
these
much.
quiet spaces and connect to beautiful things to be reminded that, there's still life even outside the chaos.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And not be afraid to get quiet and still. I more recently have heard, people say, I don't like to, part of the reason I do so much is because when I get still, that's when the thoughts come. That's when the feelings begin to come. And so that's where I go back to, circling back to the beginning of our conversation, acknowledge, name, and let it process. So, because otherwise it's stuck inside your body, right? So being brave enough to get still enough to let this stuff work its way up and out is necessary.
And it takes courage. It takes courage to look at what's really there. But I do think toward the goal of healing that it's necessary.
Yes. 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 And I tell people, don't try to do it alone. Get a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
I am a therapist with a therapist, and I see her
As
faithfully
am
every
I.
2 weeks.
Well, and as a person who counsels therapists and as a person who teaches therapists, I always say every healthy therapist has a therapist. It is because we recognize that there's still avenues in our lives that we need to process through, that are separate from the work that we're able to do with others, the holding spaces we're able to create for others. We still have our own lives. We still have the things that have happened in our life, in our experience that we're navigating. And it's good that we, take our own medicine, as you would, if you would.
That's right. That's right. Got to practice what we preach.
Absolutely. I'm my own good client. So one other topic I want us to talk about before we kind of draw to a near end, although we're just kind of going where we need to go. Keys to sustaining healthy spirituality in this season. We talked about navigating and protecting our mental health. But this is a season when spirituality is struggling as well for some. How, the God questions, how could God? How could God allow? How could God do? Is God paying attention? All of those things that connect someone to spirituality, or just what's happening. I feel in the earth, my spirit is telling me that there is something happening here. What are your thoughts?
And what a powerful question. Yeah, what a powerful question and a necessary question. I'm going to very briefly pull from some humanistic and logotherapy kind of language that, that I do think that there is something of a spiritual vacuum that we are experiencing in the world. And that spiritual vacuum really showing up as this sense of hopelessness and despair, the feeling lost, questioning purpose, and having these really intense existential questions, which are not in and of themselves bad. We all have them. And I am a proponent of asking them. But I think part of what we've got to do to protect our spirituality is recognize that even that is a part of our spirituality. I think in faith circles sometimes we perpetuate this idea that we should never feel those ways, that we should never ask questions, that we should just have faith and be grateful and thankful and trust God. And I'm not saying those things aren't true. What I am saying is we're human. And even Jesus asked my God, why hast thou forsaken me?
Right.
And so I've been really leaning into the power of lament as a spiritual practice. And we see that in the Bible, especially in Psalms. And we've got a whole book called Lamentations. I think we've lost a little bit of the art and the spiritual practice of lament. And lament is simply just the grieving, the complaining, the wailing, and not complaining in a place of being stuck, but truly crying out to God and saying, what is going on? Where are you? The very things that you just asked, Dr. Glenn, those questions. Is it Habakkuk? Habakkuk, he's like, don't you see what's happening? And this is right before, he gets the whole write the vision, make it plain thing, and you've got these prophets that cry out to God and say, just kill me now. And I think over time, we try to rush through, and we've preached through, and we've taught through those texts in a way that we don't sit with the pain of it. We like to take people.
We want to skip them past it.
Right. We want to get to the celebration. We want to get to the catharsis of the shouting and all that. But there is power in sitting in the ashes, not living there, not residing there, but it's okay to sit
acknowledging
there
again
and acknowledge. Yeah. So that is very much a part of spirituality as well. And I tell people, God is not intimidated by your questions. Not my God.
Nor is he afraid.
God is who you say God is.
Right.
And so I tell people it's okay to rage. Now I'm not saying to go and be all disrespectful.
Watch
because
that blasphemy.
God is still God. Right. But it is
God
okay
can handle your anger.
Yes. And it's okay to say, I'm angry with you. I will never forget having it out with God one night. I was mad, and God, I kept feeling the pull, on my heart. Come talk to me. Come pray. Come talk to me. And I'm like, I'm not talking to you. I'm mad. I was really mad. And then it got so loud, and the pull, the tug was so strong that I finally said, fine. So I go and I lay out on my floor, and I am fussing God out. I'm fussing God out. I'm laying out all my grievances, all my questions. I'm mad. And I remember ending that whole session by saying, and I want to forgive you, but I don't know that I can. This is me saying to God, I want to forgive you, but I don't know if I can. The absurdity, right? But truthfully, that was my experience. And I was waiting for lightning to flash. I was waiting, because I was like, no way God's going to let me get away with that. But after I said it, there was this peace that came to me. And I heard very clearly the Spirit say, okay, now we can begin. And that started my repair and my healing when it came to my relationship with God. So I say to people, it's okay. It's not like God already doesn't know. He knows how you feel.
Why are you hiding it?
Because when we name it, right. Because when we name it, we take some of the power from it. We have the ability to regulate it more. And we can put the cards on the table and begin to sort it out. And we can sort it out with God. So that's one thing. The acknowledgement, the lamenting, being truthful with yourself, being truthful with God. This is how I'm feeling. I don't understand. Whatever the sentiments are that you feel. The other thing to protect our spirituality is we've got to be consistent with our spiritual practices that we already have, right? And the spiritual practices that actually mean something to us, that we get something out of it. I'm not talking about, keep going to church just because that's what you always do. If it's not, I'm not saying don't go to church. But what I am saying is whatever the practices are, if it's journaling, if it's gardening even, because that can be a very spiritual practice. Anything that gets us, out in nature, gets us grounded, all that, those things, whatever it is that feeds our souls, we've got to do that more consistently. And then I also tell people, and it's okay to try out a new spiritual practice. So I have always been a person of prayer. Loved to pray. I was a kid praying and going to prayer meetings and stuff, just loved it. Well, in more recent years, I learned something called praying in color by Sybil Macbeth, I think is her last name. Wrote a whole book about it, but basically it's a different type of praying where you're praying literally like with doodling and colors and markers and all of that. And I put a twist on it and decided I wanted to pray with paint. So I literally, instead of using words, will take the colors and whatever I'm feeling, whatever my spirit is carrying, literally put it on the canvas. Just no words, no, just whatever comes to me, because I believe God is fluent in that language as well. So God understands. So that's my new spiritual practice, and that's been incredibly helpful.
One of the practices that I talk to my clients about is centering prayer. Perhaps, I've spent enough time at the monastery that centering prayer has kind of come to the forefront as one of those contemplation practices where you allow yourself to just sit in God's presence. Excuse me, you sit in God's presence. It's not about the conversation. It's not about the request. It's really just to be able to sit and be in the presence of God in spirit. I find that particularly helpful, and several of my clients have found it to be a helpful practice as well. And as we're approaching Lent season, right? For those of us who acknowledge the Lenten season, I am someone who typically observes Lent. For me, it's a time of kind of reconnecting myself and getting grounded again in my spirituality. So it's less about the, what's being restricted. For me, it's more about the refocusing. It's the refocusing on what are those spaces of my spirituality that feel disconnected, that I want to reconnect. And so that helps me sustain having these intentional spaces where I'm going, okay, self-check. I feel a little separation here. I feel some disconnect here. What can I do? What practices can I observe to kind of get me regrounded in my spirituality?
Yeah. And I love that. That refocusing, that recentering, everything that you said. I love that. And I think it's so vitally important. And then the other thing along with that, right, is not just the consistency of it or trying something new, but it's also increasing it, increasing the frequency of it, increasing. Because I compare it to this. If I am going to the gym, working out more than I used to, my body needs more fuel because I'm expending more energy.
Yes.
In other words, I'm going to be hungrier. My metabolism speeds up. I'm hungrier. I may have to take in more calories, to maintain and to continue to be strong and to get stronger. It's no different when it comes to our spirituality. In times, I'm going to use this phrase, in times of warfare, there's an increased expenditure of our spiritual energy, an increased expenditure of our oil, our anointing. There's more involved here. What that means is we've got to increase our intake of our spiritual food. Bottom line, if I go into increased warfare or go into warfare and think that the calories that I have been taking in are enough to cover the increased energy, no. So that's another thing. Whenever we go through these periods and these times of suffering, and even the energy and the atmosphere that we're in now as a country, it has increased. The stress, it has increased. Therefore, we need to eat more of our spiritual food in order to survive and hopefully thrive in it.
Absolutely. That's always the goal. As we're kind of drawing to a conclusion, man, this has been such a great conversation. This could be a part 1 of 15. But I am curious for you, just how do you, and I want to give you opportunity to talk a little bit about your passion and kind of where these things are going for you, like whatever you're working on now, or just kind of where your passion is taking you. How are you navigating this season?
Carefully. Intentionally, and I want to stress intention. I truly believe we're in a place, in a time where we can't afford to just get up and kind of play this by ear. We've got to be intentional about our self-care. intentional about our boundaries, intentional about our what we're consuming and how much of it we're consuming. And so I'm navigating doing all of those things. I also am really leaning into the increase of my spiritual practices when it comes to prayer and meditation. I'm doing more of the hobbies that I love, like reading. Um, and I jokingly tell people I aspire to be a crochet queen. I am not good at crochet at all, but I love it. And so trying to do a little bit more of that and not being um, distracted by the outcome, right?
Right.
Because the outcome is going to be terrible. I'm terrible at it. But just
But
the
the
process and
process.
the relaxation. Yeah, just enjoying the process of crocheting. So leaning into those hobbies, resting, being intentional about laughing. That's big
Hmm.
for me. So I find a reason to laugh every single day. Even on hard days, I'm going to find something that's going to make me laugh.
Hmm.
So that's really how I'm getting through this. And of course, people. I tell people I have what I'll call earthly angels. So really in checking in with my tribe, my earthly angels, even, if it's a text message or whatever. So keeping that um, sense of community with people that I feel safe with.
We all have to find an outlet, right? We have to find spaces
Yes.
to kind of keep us nourished and encouraged. Um,
Yes.
One of the things I wanted you to speak a little bit about is you're in a doctorate program. Tell us about your doctorate program and
I
your
am.
research.
Yeah. So I am a first year doctoral student at Denver Seminary, and I love it. And it is stretching me, and in a lot of ways, it's stretching me to think on that doctoral level and begin to engage and assess research at the doctoral level. But also, I like to share with people it is an exercise in sitting in otherness.
Hmm.
Denver Seminary at its foundation is evangelical. I am not evangelical. In fact, I'm pretty not evangelical actually. um, and I knew that, when I
Hmm.
applied to the school. Um, and I felt safe applying to the school, and I felt good about it because Denver Seminary does have what they call charitable orthodoxy, meaning you don't have to necessarily believe what they believe to go there or live into it through that denominational lens. Um, but it's been interesting to sit with people who have a differing view and different theology, and also finding ways in which our theologies and our values overlap, that there are
Yeah.
similarities there. So that's been a sort of parallel process for me, growing and learning to sit in that. Um, but my PhD is in counselor education and supervision, which on
Hmm.
its face is really about preparing me to prepare clinicians, and also conducting research and doing some leadership in the field of professional counseling. The thing about it being at Denver Seminary is there's an intentional integration of spirituality in it, which is what I was looking for. I do have a passion in spiritual integration of mental health and wellness. That's why my consulting is what it is. I am a spiritual coach and a spiritual consultant. Um, while there, I have had the opportunity last semester to write a current issues paper that required us to kind of see what kind of advocacy movements are happening in the field. And I came across the American Counseling Association's partnership around the mental health and wellness of Black men and boys. Um, so I did that research, and that's where I learned about the increased suicide risk and actually suicide rates among Black
Hmm.
men. We have seen an increase in suicide in Black men and boys by 25%.
Hmm.
A very short period of time. And even though the Black communities are lower, some of the lowest actually, in terms of suicide rate, we have to ask the question, why is it
Why is
increasing
it
so much so
increasing?
quickly?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And so that really opened my eyes and started kind of it sparked the passion for me to pay really close attention to the mental health and well-being of our Black men. The other thing is in my research and in some of my courses, um, I've found out that the peak age for suicide for white men and white women, somewhere in their 50s, but the
Mm,
peak age for suicide for Black men and Black women is more in their 20s, right? And so the implications of that, and Dr. Joe,
mm,
um, I can provide the citation later if you want
sure.
it, but Dr.
Hmm.
Joe really talks about the implications of that being, it means that white folks are losing older generations, but Black
Mm.
folks, we're losing our future. And so we've got to figure out how to intervene in a way that we have a strong future as a community of people.
I mean, that's. I'm so glad you shared that information. I think there are not enough of us focusing on that right now. I think in our community, and with these heightened stresses that are headed our way, I think it's even more imperative that we pay attention. What before, perhaps in some of our
Absolutely.
communities, we thought is something we don't do, unfortunately, has been increasing and at a rapid rate. Noticing it, I've been in youth
Absolutely.
ministry for 25 years, and recognizing the number of Black males, teens and young adults whose funerals I've had to attend or participate in definitely speaks to the fact that we
Absolutely.
are not seeing this as a rising epidemic in our communities that we need to address.
Hmm.
I
We
so
absolutely need
appreciate that.
to, and yeah, absolutely. It definitely is, to your point, rising to a point of it's a public health concern.
Hmm.
It's the third leading cause of death for Black males in our country, and we've got to do something about it.
Well, I'm glad that you're working on this, and we'll continue to look for what you bring forth for us so that we can continue to see ways that we can respond. Maybe focus on the things that need to be focused on and leave some of the foolishness out there, right?
I know
So,
that's
are
right.
there are there any other like exciting things you have coming up that you want to make the audience aware of, and then tell them how they can find you?
Yeah, yeah. So doctoral studies, of course, exciting. Woo. But
Woohoo!
also, what? Yeah. But that's led me to be much more intentional about doing work in suicide prevention. I mentioned earlier that I have lived experience with suicide uh, ideation and attempts. So that's why it's a lived experience. I've navigated through that, and I'm still here. Praise God. Um,
Hmm.
but between my own experience and then the research that I have come across and I'm starting to lean into, made me go, I need to be suicide, like I need certifications. I want certifications to go and train people how to create safe spaces and how to respond. So I recently got my first certification, which is the Soul Shop for Black churches.
Oh,
And
nice.
anybody who's interested, I would tell them to look it up, Soul Shop. You can also go to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and search for it, because Soul Shop is a partner with AFSP. And it's really focused on going and training faith communities and how to create soul safe spaces to support people who are impacted by suicide, which is everybody, whether we realize it or not. Soul Shop and the suicide language, suicide prevention data, talks about there are generally four categories of people that exist: either people who are thinking about suicide, people who are worried about someone who may be thinking about suicide, someone who's lost someone to suicide, and someone who has lived experience with suicidal behavior and risk, like I do. So we all fall in those categories somehow. Um,
Right.
and Soul Shop is about prepping people and prepping faith communities to offer support around suicide prevention. So I'm excited. Got my first certification. Anybody wants training, holla at me. I would love to come to, your communities, your faith communities, your groups. I would love to come and train and talk through and teach people about creating those soul safe communities. Um, and then the last thing I'll share in terms of exciting movements happening is, of course, my platform, Sabrina Nichole, LLC, doing many more speaking engagements, which I love. training, seminars, facilitation of groups. And so just doing big things there. And I would encourage people to check out my website, thesabrina.nichole.com. And Nichole is spelled with an H. So it is literally TheSabrinaNichole.com. TheSabrinaNichole.com. That website gives information about me, about the work that I do, but it's also a great way to connect to the resources I provide via YouTube and also blogs and podcasts and all that stuff. And people can also book me there and send any general inquiries about work and resources that I have.
Awesome. Sabrina, thank you so much for being with us today. This was an awesome conversation, much needed conversation. And I hope that people will continue to revisit this particular podcast to keep reflecting on the nuggets that kind of came to the surface today. I hope that they'll also reach out to you so that they can book you and they can connect with you in different ways. And if you happen to be in the Charlotte, Mecklenburg area, you might be able to find her. I don't know. She might be in these streets, as they say.
Yes.
So thank you so much. So glad that you were here for this episode of the Theotherapist Podcast. Thank you all for listening. Take care of yourself and be well.
Theotherapist Podcast, real talk at the intersection of theology and therapy. Check out Dr. Glenn's new journal series titled Brain Dump Journals for the Busy, available on Amazon. Visit our websites for more information at thetheotherapist.com or catriceglenn.com.